The courtroom was tense, filled with the quiet hum of anticipation and the soft shuffle of papers, but it fell completely silent the moment the little girl was brought in. She was no more than 7, tiny and fragile, her small hands secured in handcuffs that seemed far too heavy for her age. Her wide eyes darted nervously from one side of the room to the other, reflecting confusion and fear that made the entire space feel heavier, as if her innocence pressed down on everyone present. The whispers that had floated through the crowd before her entrance died instantly, replaced by a palpable hush, broken only by the sharp click of her small shoes against the polished courtroom floor. She didn't understand the magnitude of where she was or why she had been placed in such a position, her young mind struggling to make sense of the formal, intimidating space dominated by stern faces and the looming presence of authority. In the back of the room, the maid who had cared for her since infancy sat rigidly, her heart racing, her eyes never leaving the girl for a single moment. The maid's mind ran through memories of the child's life, the gentle laughter, the innocent mischief, and the quiet nights when she had comforted the little one after nightmares. All the evidence that proved the girl's innocence. A tight knot of worry and determination formed in the maid's chest. She knew that this moment could define the girl's life, and she also knew she could not remain passive, as the girl was led toward the center of the room. Her tiny frame seemed to shrink even further under the harsh glare of the courtroom lights, making her look almost like a fragile bird trapped in a cage too large to comprehend. The judge's eyes, sharp and expectant, followed her every step, and the murmurs of curiosity from the crowd threatened to rise again, but the weight of the girl's fear kept them subdued. Each movement she made, every hesitant step, was a testament to the bravery she didn't yet realize she possessed, and the maid felt a surge of protectiveness, vowing silently that she would do whatever it took to reveal the truth. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, thick with suspense, as if the walls of the courtroom were aware that something extraordinary was about to unfold. The child's innocence was a fragile secret hanging in the balance, and the maid's quiet determination began to pulse like a heartbeat through the room, unseen but undeniably present. With every glance, every whispered instruction from the maid, the girl drew a tiny measure of courage, though fear still clung to her, and in that moment, as the crowd watched in stunned silence, the first threads of a story that would shock everyone in the courtroom were already being woven. A story of bravery, loyalty, and the extraordinary power of one human's unwavering care to stand against injustice. The judge's gavel struck the bench, and the courtroom seemed to shrink under the weight of authority and expectation. Silence fell like a heavy blanket, pressing down on the little girl as she stood, unsure of where to look or how to respond. Her small voice trembled as she tried to speak, barely audible over the hushed breathing of the crowd, and every word seemed to get tangled in her fear. The prosecuting attorney's voice rang out, sharp and rigid, each sentence delivered with a precision that left no room for mercy or understanding. He described the accusations as though they were facts carved in stone, each word cold, unfeeling, and almost cruel to the ears of those who watched. The girl's hands shook uncontrollably, and tears welled in her eyes, threatening to fall at any moment, making her appear even smaller and more fragile in the immense, intimidating space of the courtroom. The maid, who had been standing silently at the back, felt her stomach tighten as she saw the child struggle, her heart aching with every quiver and sob that escaped the girl. She had known all along that the girl was innocent, yet now, seeing the injustice unfold so vividly, she realized that waiting silently was no longer an option. Her mind raced, trying to find a way to intervene without causing a scene or drawing undue attention, and yet the urgency of the moment made hesitation impossible. Every passing second seemed heavier than the last, each word from the attorney a hammer striking the fragile hope that still lingered in the girl's heart. The maid's eyes scanned the courtroom, noting the expressions on the faces of the jury, the murmurs from the spectators, and the rigid posture of the officials who believed everything they were told. She knew she had to act carefully, balancing strategy with courage, because the truth needed to be revealed before the situation became irreversible. Her hands clenched at her sides as she silently rehearsed the steps she would take, the evidence she would present, and the words she would speak, all while keeping her presence calm and composed so that she could guide the girl through the ordeal without alarming anyone. The girl, unaware of the maid's silent determination, continued to tremble under the intensity of scrutiny, her innocence shining through despite the harshness of the accusations. The tension in the room became almost unbearable, the air thick with anticipation, as if everyone could feel that something significant was about to happen, though no one yet knew what. The maid's mind worked swiftly, mapping out each possible reaction from the judge, the attorney, and the jury, preparing to seize the exact moment when she could step forward and change the course of events. And in that charged, silent atmosphere, the first spark of defiance and hope began to ignite, a quiet promise that the truth would not remain hidden, and that the little girl would not face injustice alone, setting the stage for a confrontation that would shock the courtroom and reveal the power of unwavering human courage. As the courtroom proceedings continued, the maid leaned slightly forward, her eyes never leaving the little girl, her mind working quickly to piece together the truth hidden beneath the official statements and accusations. She noticed the subtle signs of the girl's reactions, tiny fidgets of her fingers, a hesitant glance toward a familiar face, the almost imperceptible shake of her shoulders, and realized that each movement carried a story that the courtroom had failed to hear. Quietly, the maid whispered gentle reassurances to the child, small words of comfort that went unnoticed by the officials, but strengthened the girl's courage, giving her a hint of hope amid the towering fear around her. With every word and gesture, the maid began connecting the dots, understanding that the accusation against the child was not born from any wrongdoing on her part, but from a careless error, a misunderstanding that had spiraled into something frighteningly serious. She traced the sequence of events in her mind, a moment of miscommunication, a rushed judgment, assumptions made too quickly by adults who were supposed to protect and guide, not condemn. As the lawyers spoke, the maid listened closely to each carefully chosen word, her sharp eyes catching the subtle slips, contradictions, and gaps in their stories. Some statements were full of technical language, designed to confuse and intimidate, while others relied on half-truths and assumptions presented as facts. The maid's pulse quickened as she recognized patterns of deception, noticing where the truth had been twisted to fit a narrative that would make the girl appear guilty when she was not. She felt a surge of determination, a rising tide of resolve that told her she could not remain silent. An innocent child was at the mercy of adults who had allowed impatience, carelessness, and fear to override fairness and justice. And the maid understood that her role had become crucial in this moment. Every nerve in her body was focused on protecting the girl, and every thought centered on revealing what the world needed to see, that a young life should not be shaped by false accusations and careless words. The courtroom, with its polished wood and intimidating authority, suddenly felt smaller, as if all its grandeur and formality could not contain the growing truth that was about to be exposed. The maid's mind raced, planning each subtle intervention, each piece of evidence she could use, each carefully chosen moment to speak up without alarming those who might resist hearing the truth. She knew the path ahead would require courage, timing, and precision, but the knowledge that the girl's innocence had been buried under layers of error and assumption fueled her determination. In the midst of the tension, the maid understood that she held the key to lifting the shadow of fear from the child, that the hidden truth could save the little girl from an injustice that might otherwise have marked her for life, and that her quiet strength, careful observation, and unwavering resolve were the only things standing between innocence and wrongful punishment. The courtroom seemed frozen in time, the moment the maid stood, her small but determined figure drawing every eye in the room toward her. Whispers erupted around the benches, quickly stifled as the gravity of her action became clear. No one had expected her to rise, to step into the center of a room dominated by authority and judgment. She held herself with quiet strength, shoulders straight, hands clasped calmly in front of her, projecting a confidence that contrasted sharply with the fear and tension hanging over the little girl in handcuffs. Clearing her throat softly, she asked for permission to speak, her voice steady, carrying an unexpected authority that demanded attention without needing to raise volume. All eyes, including those of the judge, the attorneys, and the murmuring crowd, turned toward her, drawn not only by curiosity, but by the subtle certainty in her tone, the unspoken promise that what she was about to say mattered. She began to recount the little girl's life with care and precision, describing the child's gentle nature, her curiosity, and the small acts of kindness she had shown to everyone around her. The maid painted a vivid picture of innocence, of a child whose character had never hinted at harm or malice, emphasizing details that only someone who had cared for her deeply could know. She then carefully explained the events leading to the accusation, highlighting the misunderstandings and mistakes that had created the situation, showing how a series of small errors had been magnified into something that seemed serious but was, in truth, harmless. As she spoke, the room fell into an unusual silence, the words cutting through the usual legal formality and reaching the hearts of those present. Even the judge, who had heard countless testimonies and weighed endless arguments, appeared moved, his eyes softening as he listened to the maid's sincere and unwavering account. The weight of her sincerity filled the room, making it impossible to ignore the human truth behind the legal procedure, forcing everyone to pause and reflect on what had truly happened. The attorneys shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the story they had been presenting lacked the depth of understanding and compassion that this woman brought to the courtroom. The little girl, watching from her seat, began to relax slightly, her small body still tense but her eyes brightening with recognition and trust, sensing that someone she loved was fighting for her in a way that went beyond words or authority. Each sentence the maid spoke built a bridge between cold legal procedure and human reality, reminding everyone present that behind every case was a life, a story, and emotions that could not be ignored. By the time she finished, the courtroom had changed. The air felt lighter, the atmosphere less rigid, as though her courage had injected hope into a place that had felt impossibly intimidating just moments before. In that moment, the maid had not only stood for the little girl's innocence, but had reminded everyone present that truth and compassion were forces stronger than fear or assumption, setting the stage for the revelation that would ultimately clear the child and restore justice. The little girl sat frozen for a moment, her tiny hands gripping the edges of the bench, her eyes wide as they darted between the stern faces of the judge, the attorneys, and the curious spectators. But something had shifted inside her. The maid's courage had ignited a spark of strength, a quiet reassurance that she was not alone and that someone believed in her completely. Slowly, she lifted her head, her lips trembling, and began to speak, her voice small but steadying with every word. At first, it was barely audible, a soft murmur that seemed to struggle against the heavy silence of the courtroom. But as she continued, her words grew clearer, more deliberate, each one carrying the honesty of a child who had known fear, yet never lost truth. She explained the events that had led to the accusation, her simple sentences revealing details that adults had overlooked, showing the misunderstanding that had turned a minor mistake into a serious claim. Her voice quivered, yet there was a compelling force behind it, an authenticity that made the room listen more intently, forcing those present to pause and consider the reality she was presenting. The attorneys exchanged glances, surprised at the clarity and innocence in her explanation, realizing that the facts she spoke were both truthful and undeniable. The spectators leaned forward, drawn by the courage of someone so small, yet so determined to tell her story, and a shift began to occur in the atmosphere. Judgment softened, skepticism gave way to concern, and the cold, formal tone of the courtroom slowly transformed into one of empathy. The judge, whose expression had been stern and impassive, leaned slightly forward, his gaze fixed on the child as he listened, his eyes reflecting the understanding that had been missing until this moment. Each word from the little girl highlighted not only her innocence but also the resilience and clarity that even a young child could demonstrate when given support and encouragement. The maid, standing quietly at the side, allowed herself a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that the girl's voice was not just heard, but felt, carrying the weight of truth that no formal argument could overpower. The room seemed to breathe as the story unfolded from the child's perspective, the power of her honesty breaking through the tension that had gripped the courtroom for hours. Every listener, from the attorneys to the jury to the spectators, felt the unmistakable presence of innocence and the need to reconsider assumptions they had made without understanding. By the time she finished, her small voice had achieved what no legal argument could have done alone. It had brought the human element back into the courtroom, reminding everyone that justice is not only about laws and procedures, but about listening, understanding, and believing in the truth of those who are often overlooked. In that moment, the little girl's bravery became a force of change, shifting the balance from fear and suspicion to compassion and hope, ensuring that the next steps would honor the truth she had courageously shared. The maid reached into her bag with a steady hand, her eyes scanning the courtroom as she carefully retrieved the items she had brought: letters, photographs, and small objects that seemed ordinary to anyone else, but held the key to proving the little girl's innocence. As she laid each piece on the bench, the room fell silent, the tension thickening for a moment as everyone waited to see what she would reveal. The letters, written in the girl's own handwriting, told simple but undeniable stories of her daily life, her kindness, and the events that had occurred leading up to the accusation. The photographs captured moments of innocence and honesty, scenes of laughter and small gestures that could not be mistaken for wrongdoing. Images that painted a vivid picture of a child who had never caused harm and had been wrongly judged. She presented tiny details that only someone who had known the girl intimately could recall: the way she always left a small note of thanks, the careful care she took with her belongings, the habits that revealed her gentle and truthful nature. Each piece of evidence was explained calmly by the maid, connecting the dots in a way that revealed the truth clearly, showing that the accusations were not based on fact but on misunderstanding and assumption. As she spoke, the courtroom reacted. Gasps echoed softly as people began to see the situation in a new light, realizing that what had seemed impossible moments before was now unfolding clearly, undeniable in its truth. The prosecuting attorney shifted uneasily, caught off guard by the depth and precision of the evidence, while the judge leaned forward, his expression softening as he absorbed the facts that contradicted the earlier claims. The little girl, watching the maid with wide, hopeful eyes, felt a weight lift from her shoulders, sensing that the tide was turning and that justice was slowly moving in her favor. The spectators murmured among themselves, whispers spreading as they began to understand the story in its entirety, the innocence of the child shining through each piece of proof. The maid's careful preparation and intimate knowledge of the girl's life had transformed the courtroom, shifting the energy from one of fear and suspicion to clarity and understanding. Even the jury, who had remained reserved and uncertain, now appeared visibly moved, their expressions revealing that they could no longer ignore the truth that had been so carefully and courageously presented. The evidence told a story that words alone could not convey, a story that restored hope and began to dissolve the tension that had hung over the room like a heavy cloud. By the time the maid finished, the narrative was undeniable. The little girl had been misunderstood, wrongly accused, and entirely innocent, and the room, once filled with suspicion and judgment, now felt lighter, as if the truth itself had released a burden that had weighed on every heart present. In that moment, It became clear to everyone that the path forward was no longer about punishment or doubt, but about acknowledging innocence, understanding the human story behind the accusation, and witnessing the quiet but powerful triumph of truth over fear. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the judge leaned back slightly in his chair, his fingers steepled together as he carefully considered the evidence and the maid's heartfelt testimony. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that made every small sound shuffling papers. A cough, a creak in the wooden floor feel, amplified, as if time itself had slowed to watch the moment unfold. The little girl, still sitting on the edge of her seat, lifted her eyes and found the maid's gaze across the room. In that silent exchange, so much was communicated: fear, hope, trust, and the fragile belief that someone could protect her in a world that suddenly felt so large and threatening. The maid's smile was gentle but firm, carrying reassurance and warmth. A quiet signal that she would not let anything harm her, that courage and truth were on their side. The child's small hands relaxed slightly as she drew comfort from that smile, and the tension in her body softened just a fraction, enough to let her breathe and feel a glimmer of safety. Around them, the courtroom, which had moments ago felt like a place of judgment and looming punishment, began to shift subtly in tone. Jurors leaned forward, their expressions caught between curiosity and empathy, sensing that the story before them was no longer just about procedure, but about real human lives and emotions. The lawyers, too, seemed to recognize the weight of what had been presented. Even the prosecuting attorney paused mid-sentence, his practiced composure faltering as he took in the undeniable evidence and the sincerity of the maid's words. The judge's eyes lingered on the child, a faint softness in his gaze betraying that he understood the stakes more deeply than the formalities of the law could convey. Every heartbeat in the room seemed synchronized with the suspense of the moment, each person silently awaiting the decision that could change a young life forever. The maid's presence, calm yet resolute, seemed to steady the atmosphere, reminding everyone that this was not a performance of guilt or punishment, but a test of fairness, compassion, and understanding. The little girl's courage, quietly nurtured by the maid's support, had transformed the courtroom dynamic. Innocence and truth had begun to pierce through fear and assumption, in that fragile, weighty silence. It was as if the room itself recognized the turning point, the moment when the balance tipped from suspicion toward justice, when human empathy overpowered rigid procedure, and when hope, fragile but undeniable, could finally breathe in a space that had felt suffocating for far too long. The judge's pause, extended and deliberate, carried the full gravity of possibility, and the spectators, feeling the subtle shift in energy, began to sense that the story they were witnessing was no ordinary case, but a profound demonstration of courage, support, and the enduring power of truth. In that quiet, expectant moment, the courtroom transformed from a place of fear into a place where justice and the human heart behind it would ultimately prevail. The judge's gavel fell with a final, resonant echo, and the courtroom seemed to exhale as the decision was announced. The little girl was innocent. A hush spread through the room, thick with disbelief and relief, as if everyone present was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Slowly, the handcuffs that had bound her tiny wrists for what felt like an eternity were removed, the metal sliding away with a soft clink that sounded louder than it should have in the tense silence. The girl's eyes, wide and shimmering with tears, locked on the maid, and without hesitation, she ran forward and wrapped her small arms around the woman who had never left her side, hugging her tightly with all the fear, gratitude, and love she had stored over the past hours. The maid, holding her gently, whispered soothing words, feeling the weight of relief wash over both of them, a tide that seemed to sweep through every corner of the courtroom. Observers watched in stunned silence, their usual rigidity softened by the display of raw emotion and human connection. For once, the The law and humanity were not in opposition, but moving together in a quiet harmony. The attorneys and the judge exchanged glances, their faces reflecting a mixture of surprise, respect, and perhaps even a sense of humility, realizing that justice in this moment was not about winning or losing, but about righting a wrong that had never truly existed. The spectators, many of whom had entered the courtroom expecting drama and conflict, found themselves caught in something far deeper: the power of compassion, the courage it took to stand for the truth, and the undeniable bond between the maid and the child that had held strong against fear and doubt. Tears began to roll down the girl's cheeks, glistening in the light, and some in the audience wiped their own eyes, moved not by sensationalism but by witnessing the triumph of honesty and care over suspicion and misunderstanding. Every gesture, from the girl's trembling relief to the maid's reassuring embrace, carried a weight that words could not capture, reminding everyone present that human connection could change the course of events more profoundly than rules or rhetoric ever could. The courtroom, once filled with tension, judgment, and cold formality, was now a space of celebration, quietly acknowledging the bravery it had taken to protect innocence and speak the truth. Even the judge's tone softened as he concluded the session, a small smile breaking through the formality as he recognized the extraordinary human story he had just overseen. In that single, powerful moment, the room collectively understood something essential. Justice was not only a matter of law, but of courage, empathy, and the willingness to act for what is right, even when the world expects silence. The little girl, finally free from the chains of accusation, clung to the maid with a mix of relief, love, and newfound trust, and the spectators left with hearts stirred, carrying the lesson that one person's unwavering support could restore innocence, heal fear, and remind the world that human kindness and courage remain stronger than any moment of injustice. News of the courtroom victory spread quickly, moving like a ripple through the community and beyond, reaching people who had never met the little girl or the maid, but were touched by the story of courage and truth. Newspapers printed the tale of how a small, innocent child had been wrongly accused, and how the unwavering bravery of a devoted maid had revealed the truth, capturing the hearts of readers everywhere. Social media buzzed with posts celebrating the maid's determination and the girl's honesty, and soon local groups and neighbors began rallying to offer support, donations, and words of encouragement, determined to show that justice and compassion could thrive outside the walls of a courtroom. The maid and the little girl returned home quietly, walking through familiar streets that now felt different, brighter somehow, because the weight of fear and uncertainty had been lifted, replaced with hope in the sense that their lives had been irrevocably changed. Each familiar corner of their neighborhood seemed to hold new significance, every friendly face a reminder that the world could respond with understanding and care when courage and truth were present. The little girl, still small and fragile in appearance, carried within her a new strength. The lessons of that day etched deeply into her heart. She had learned the meaning of trust, first in the maid who had protected her, then in herself, discovering that her own voice mattered and could make a difference. Courage became tangible to her, no longer just a word adults spoke of, but something she had lived, felt, and seen in action as the maid stood firmly for her when others hesitated. She also learned resilience, the quiet power to endure fear, uncertainty, and even moments of misunderstanding, knowing that challenges could be faced and overcome without losing integrity or hope. As they settled back into their home, the bond between the maid and the girl deepened, strengthened not just by daily routines and care, but by shared experiences that had tested them both and proved their loyalty, wisdom, and love for each other. The girl began to understand that life could be unpredictable and sometimes frightening, but with trust and the support of those who genuinely care, even the most overwhelming situations could be faced and conquered. Their story inspired those around them as well, reminding neighbors, friends, and distant readers alike that standing up for what is right, protecting the innocent, and acting with compassion could create a ripple effect, changing not just one life, but the hearts of many. The maid quietly reflected on the journey, aware that the little girl's life had been transformed, and that together they had witnessed something extraordinary, the power of human courage and loyalty to confront fear and injustice, and the lasting impact that love, honesty, and determination could have on a young life. As the girl went to bed that night, her heart was full, not only with relief and gratitude, but with a newfound understanding of the strength she could carry forward, lessons she would remember and rely on for the rest of her life, a proof that even the smallest voices, supported by courage and care, could change the world around them forever. Years passed, and the little girl who had once stood trembling in handcuffs grew into a young woman full of confidence, compassion, and strength, carrying with her the lessons of that life-changing day in the courtroom. Every step she took, every choice she made, reflected the values instilled in her through the love and courage of the maid, who had stood by her when the world seemed cold and unfair. She never forgot the quiet determination in the maid's eyes, the gentle reassurance that had given her the courage to speak her truth, and the unwavering support that had protected her when she had no other defender. The story of their ordeal spread far and wide, moving from the courtroom to newspapers, community gatherings, and eventually to social media and beyond, becoming a tale of human bravery, loyalty, and compassion that resonated with countless people. Families, teachers, and children everywhere were inspired, seeing in the little girl's journey proof that even the smallest voice can make a difference when supported by courage and truth. The young woman used her experience to help others, becoming an advocate for fairness and understanding, speaking at schools, community centers, and events, encouraging people to stand up for what is right and to care deeply for those who might be vulnerable or misunderstood. Her life became a living example of how kindness, empathy, and bravery could overcome fear, suspicion, and injustice, showing that the actions of one person, combined with the support of another, could ripple outward and touch countless lives. The maid, who had once been simply a caretaker, was recognized not just for her loyalty, but for her extraordinary courage, the bravery that had altered the course of the girl's life and inspired everyone who learned their story. Their bond remained unbroken through the years, a testament to the power of human connection and the profound impact of standing up for someone when they cannot stand for themselves. The young woman often reflected on that day, remembering the fear she had felt, the uncertainty that had seemed so heavy, and the moment when someone believed in her without hesitation. It shaped the way she approached life, instilling in her the resilience to face challenges with grace and the empathy to help others overcome their own struggles. Communities shared their story as a symbol of hope, reminding people that no matter how overwhelming circumstances may seem, courage, compassion, and steadfast support can change outcomes and transform lives. In moments of injustice, when fear and doubt seem to dominate, the memory of a little girl in handcuffs and the maid who refused to let her be silenced stands as a beacon, proving that human kindness can triumph over adversity, that love and courage are stronger than fear, and that one brave act can ignite a legacy that continues to inspire and uplift generations. The young woman carried that legacy forward in everything she did, a living reminder that the simplest acts of care and courage can leave a mark on the world far beyond what anyone could imagine.